I'm Darren Cronshaw, the researcher at Baptist Union of Victoria.
And I'm Kylie Butler, the pastor for emerging leaders at the Baptist Union of Victoria.
And today we're talking about the ABC of XYZ for BUV, for the Baptist Union of Victoria. Baptist Union has three priorities at the moment. Firstly, we want to train and develop new pioneering leaders. Secondly, we want to understand and foster our cultural diversity.
And the third one is actually a greater understanding of empowering young people for mission and understanding the younger demographic.
Hence the topic of our conversation today. So a generation is a cohort of people born within a similar span of time, 15 years at the upper end, who share a comparable age and life stage and who were shaped by a particular span of time in terms of events, trends and developments. So baby busters were born between 1930 and 45, and the events that happened at that time shaped who they were. And now they're the 66 to 80-year-old people in society.
The baby boomers were born about 1946 to 1964, and so are around 50 to 65 currently.
Gen X were born between 1965 and 79, aged 36 to 50. And Gen X make up 21% of Australia, but actually make up 44% of our workforce.
And then we move to Gen Y, which are born 1980 to 1994. They are our 21 to 35-year-olds and currently in university and in their first few years of the workforce.
Gen Z, born between 95 and 2009, are aged 6 to 20, so basically all of today's school students.
And the new one coming through is Generation Alpha. So born 2010 to 2015 plus, and obviously we haven't hit our 15-year mark there. So they're our 0 to 5-year-olds. So where do you fit in this generation?
Here's a snapshot of the different generations in Australia, and you can see that baby boomers, Gen X, Y and Z, basically make up about 20% of Australia each, and there's still a number of baby builders and the emerging Generation Alpha.
One of the important questions we need to ask is how do we understand this Generation X, Y and Z, and why is that important? So I'm going to invite Leah up, who is actually a Generation Y, to help us unpack this area. So why is it important to understand Generation X, Y and Z? I want to introduce to you Leah. Leah Coombs is at the Baptist Union. Leah, what's your role here at the BUV?
I'm a personal assistant and I work for the Pastoral Support and Development team.
And you're also Gen Y.
And I am Gen Y.
Good to have you along. Thanks for coming.
Thanks.
As we unpack these younger generations, it's really important that we understand how can we retain the younger generations. If we look at the population statistics, our builders make up about 9% of our population. However, in our churches, they make up about 21% of our church population. If we think about Generation Z, there's about 9% in our Australian population. We look at our churches, it's around 6%. So we have some imbalance in when we're considering how we retain this younger generation. So Generation Y and Z are some of the most underrepresented age groups within our churches. Only about 5% of young adults attend church regularly. But how do we re-engage and especially spiritually re-engage this younger generation in order to retain them? Leo, you're a Gen Y. How do you think this works with Gen Ys?
I believe that with Gen Ys, we don't see church as a building anymore, attending on a Sunday. For us, a lot of us podcasting on a Sunday morning. There's always a different way to do church. We are more about doing community as well, so we feel that going out on a Wednesday night and volunteering in some capacity, that is us in community doing some form of church.
So there's a quote by Hugh Mackay which talks about no one seems to like being called religious, but spirituality is a really, really interesting subject. How would you respond to that as a Gen Y?
I think Gen Ys are quite spiritual and we don't like to be called religious, and I think that has a lot to do with social media, the way that Christians kind of get slammed a lot these days because of what we believe, but then there's a lot of Christians who see themselves as very spiritual at the same time. So I completely agree with Hugh's quote, and I would step into that little pocket of the spirituality side of things. So 58% of our pastors are over the age of 50, which means more than half are boomers, and they'll be retiring in the next 15 years. Then we've got 33% are aged between the ages of 36 to 49, so 1/3 of our pastors are Gen X, and then only 9% of our pastoral leaders are aged between 18 and 35. So that's less than 10% who are Gen Y, which is pretty scary.
Yeah, we do have a massive leadership transfer that is imminent with that. But we don't just look at that in our church leadership, we can look at that in the marketplace with business leaders as well, because about 40% of business leaders will be retiring within the next decade.
There was a baby boomer journalist who was interviewing a Gen Y interviewee and said, "I found two big problems with Gen Y. Your ignorance of life and culture and your apathy as slackers." "What's worse for you?" he asked. "Your ignorance or your apathy?" And the young adult, not making sense of the tirade, replied, "Mate, I don't know and I don't care." But actually, Gen Y and Z, Mark McCrindle suggests, are actually more environmentally and politically conscious than ever. They do know and they do care. Young people are early adopters, cultural influencers, technological natives, digital integrators and trend leaders. They tend to, McCrindle suggests, distrust authority figures. Age doesn't necessarily equate to authority. Their primary influences are their peers. He also indicates that sadly 1 in 4 are obese and 1 in 5 have some form of mental illness they're challenged with. 27% of their waking hours is in front of screens, including seeing 30 to 40,000 commercials per year. 35% of teenagers binge drink regularly and 43% occasionally. And in fact, 75% of Gen Y are in debt, mostly for depreciating and lifestyle items. Now that's what Mark McCrindle says. Leah, do you find that's the case, and what are the implications for our churches?
Yeah, look, I can speak into two of those points that Mark's brought up in his research. Especially with the debt of our generation, I can definitely see that because a lot of us, in our ages of our mid-20s are buying houses and getting these massive mortgages, like they're bigger than they've ever been before. So that's really restricting us to sort of our dreams. If we had a dream of where we wanted to work or what we wanted to do, now we just need to really work to make money because we're getting into all this debt. And in our lifestyle choices as well, I can definitely see with social media these days, I believe we are a generation of now. We don't want to wait, we don't want to save up to go on holidays or to buy the best cars or the best clothes. So I see a lot of my Christian friends even being really influenced by what's happening around them, what's being shown on their Instagram accounts or on Facebook, and always wanting the next best thing. And there's this real pressure, especially as like a female speaking into that, there's a real pressure of what you're seeing, what you're wearing, who's going on these holidays, and you're trying to keep up with the Joneses. So that's affecting our churches definitely, because it's becoming a more of a me culture in the church. It's not this love and grace and giving is really restricting us because you're trying to keep up with what's happening around you. So that's one point I can see. And the other one, definitely this mental illness. Talking to my parents, we never talked about depression or anything like that because it was sort of just pushed under the carpet if someone did have a mental illness. Whereas in my generation, it's so prevalent, and so many I know of my Christian friends and obviously non-Christian friends have some form of mental illness and are being medicated for it. And it's quite common now that you'll be in a conversation and you'll say, well, the person will say to you, yes, I've got depression, and they're a Christian, and that's just common now. And so the way we handle mental illness in the church is a big thing, and I think that the church is doing a great job at combating that, but it's just becoming like second nature and lingo these days. So definitely can see where he's coming from in that point.
Some other information that Mark McCrindle informs us about is families and different generations. And so, for example, today 79% of couples live together before marriage, which is quite different to even 1982, where it was only 38% of couples who lived together before marriage. Parents are nearly a decade older when they have their first children. Many people in their 60s are still providing for dependent children and caring for ageing parents, and so drawn in both directions. And over 50% of mothers with children under 5 work, and 75% of mothers work once their youngest child is 6. House prices have doubled, as Leah was referring to. The average mortgage in 1982 was $29,000, which was the equivalent of 185 average weeks' pay. But today it's $318,000, which is equivalent to 550 weeks' pay. And couple households with no children will soon be more numerous than nuclear families, and single occupancy households are currently actually the fastest growing type. What do you think, Kylie? Is that how you see emerging generations?
Yeah, definitely. Particularly if I think about the house prices. I think of what my parents bought when they first got married compared to what my husband and I bought when we first got married, and there's a significant difference in the pricing in that, and that does affect work life and work-life balance and families as well. If I think about even my mum's group in particular, the age of mums today, so I was considered a really young mum, having a child at 25 years old, and all of my friends in my mum's group were in their early to mid-30s, so I was easily 10 years younger than any other mother that was in my mum's group. So
you would have been the average age a generation ago.
Yes.
Now you're unique.
Yes, I'm still much younger to be a mum now, and so I think there is quite a significant difference in the generations. And I'm a Gen X, so I think that will be more significant with the Gen Ys.
Well, let me introduce Miwan Young, who works with the Baptist Union. What's your role, Miwan, with the Baptist Union?
Multicultural consultant.
Mark McCrindle raises 2 other significant issues for emerging generations and for the implications, and we would suggest for the implications for churches. And they are around gender and cultural diversity. In the 1950s, 1 in 5 university students were female, but today more women complete Year 12 than men, and 57% of higher education students are women, just as a reflection of how society is welcoming and celebrating the leadership contribution of women. But also, interestingly, baby builders and baby boomers lived under a White Australia policy, which was abolished in 1973. Now more than a quarter of Australians are born overseas, and more than a third of Australians aged under 30 were born overseas. So, Miwan, what do you see as the implications of Mark McCrindle's statistics around gender and cultural diversity?
Well, in our multicultural churches, migrant churches, that gender issues is huge compared to our Western cultures. For me, I'm from Korea and educated here too, but as a woman who also in the leadership, it was fine until that church is accepting as a woman to be a pastor. So that quite a patriarchal society and structures. Lots of young women, they working together unless they are not the leaders. So our church has got big challenges and also to realize how the gender issues, the big issues, and how to include that the woman and man together.
And what about cultural diversity? Can you tell us a bit of an overview of the cultural diversity of our Baptist churches in Victoria?
Well, we can also say that the old migrant and young migrant. So depends also there in a second generation issues and the first generation. Second generation, those who are born here in Australia, and the first generation people are over 20s who are coming, migrate in Australia. Most of our migrant churches is practicing still the deacons and the leadership team are men. So that's our huge challenges. Well, while I saying this, but some churches they are changing, which is quite encouraging. So that's what we can see that the window we have.
Meanwhile, how many of our churches worship in languages other than English? And do you find that they have issues in terms of different generations understanding and working together?
We have about 70 churches who worship languages other than English. And also on the top of that, other churches are very integrated multicultural churches. These 1/3 churches, some are migrated a long time ago, like 60 years, so they have some second generation children and young adult people. Others are very recent. So we have a really diverse, and recently about 25 churches, they are from Chin and Korean Burmese churches. In our multicultural churches, the generational gap is huge. It's not only for the generational gaps, but also education, those who educated in English-speaking schools. So the older generation and younger generation has got massively the big gap. Also with the language issues, there's still the translations and that's big issues for us. So when we're talking about the Generation Y, though they're our Generation Y migrant churches, I think they are more like this. They actually live in both cultures, like first and they like Western culture and also their home culture. They're actually working together, so more communicative and more family orientated. So the relationship is quite important. They're maintaining with the parents and relatives, and not only for the relatives but also communities together. So our migrant Y-gen, they more tend to stay together with the families. And recently we had the Ignite Youth and Young Adult Conference, which is multicultural church conference, and was quite interesting when we had some video. Should be the youth and young adult, but also there are a lot of the older people were there together. That's how we work. That young people doesn't mean only young people, but parents and older people, pastors, they stand together and they join together.
Kylie, Mark McCrindle gives an interesting snapshot of moral concerns of different generations. And so, for example, he says baby builders were often concerned with issues or are concerned with issues like unplanned pregnancies or abortion or indecent images. Baby boomers perhaps more interested in issues like gender equality and sexual freedom, access to contraceptives and abortion.
Gen Y is, I guess, more intrigued in gay rights, the culturally diverse and equality, as well as world poverty. Sexual responsibility, particularly in the wake of the AIDS epidemic, and also the ozone layer and pollution. Gen Ys and Gen Zs, it's more about watering your garden and ensuring that you're looking after the environment, hosing down your car and not having such a long shower. Particularly around issues of climate change and same-sex marriage is a real moral concern. Refugees in detention centres is another area of concern. As well as moral issues associated with new technologies and the illegal songs and movie downloads and things like that.
So what happens in our churches when we have builders, boomers, X's and Gen Y and Z's together and they have different perspectives on what should be the main moral concerns of our churches?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a clash in that space because you've got very different moral frameworks that are coming together in one place. but there's going to be some tension and resistances in that place. And so being able to communicate really well and unpack those spaces and then have some grace and understanding for each other in those spaces, I think is really critical.
Do you think one generation has it more right than the other, or do you think they just have different insights about issues that should be put on the agenda?
I think we can only say that they're different. I don't think we dare go down whether one generation is right.
Another important issue is just understanding how we can actually engage and educate and train people of different generations. And baby boomers grew up in a schooling environment and grew up in a training environment where training was verbal. They would learn to sit and listen. The teacher was the sage on the stage. When they did exams, it was closed book. They could never, open the book, or that was cheating. They'd learn in the classrooms.
Yeah.
How's it different for Gen Z?
It is different. It's much more visual. So you notice even the classrooms are based around tables, not a teacher up the front teaching everybody, but it's a lot more of a student-led space in that. So it's a try and see, it's a give it a go, see if it works, what did you learn from that? It's a facilitator based. A guide is on the side rather than a teacher up the front giving the communication. It's process, it's about how does this work, how does it fit? Guess trying and seeing and giving things a go. Learner-centric rather than a teacher-centric model. Open book, you'll notice that many more of the exams are, it's an open book, or you can bring notes into an exam, which is quite different. And there's learning stations, so moving around the education space in order to be able to learn. So I think they're quite different in their education and learning spaces.
So Mark McCrindle concludes on this. He says, we often deliver 19th century content in 20th century buildings to 21st century students and wonder why we're not connecting.
Yeah.
And so he says, if they don't learn the way we teach, then let's teach the way they learn. The more styles you use, the fewer listeners you'll lose.
Great insight. Great insight. I think we need to actually do some adapting and some changing in our communication styles in order to be able to help this next generation to be better disciples, better understanding of who Jesus is.
So, Leah, what is your response to McCrindle's comments on recruiting younger generations, and what are the implications for our churches?
Well, personally, I'm 27 years old and I've already had 6 full-time jobs. So I guess I'm a product of being a Gen Yer. The way it would impact the churches, well, for a working woman, I guess the days are gone now where we had the opportunity to have kids and stay home and raise their families. If you've got a mortgage, then the woman needs to go back into the workforce. So this will impact the churches because women won't be able to give as much time into helping, volunteering within church, like your mainly musics and your CRE stuff at school, whatever they call it these days. A lot of Christian women are having to go back to work after they have kids, so there's an impact on the church already. Also, I think the expectations from church on people, because most of us are all working full time, we feel like we can't volunteer in any capacity with the church because the expectations on us are so high, and you're expected to be at like a midweek group, and then you need to be there early on a Sunday, and then you need to go to your specific volunteer group catch-ups. I know for me that's put me off in the past because I think, well, I work full time and I would like to help out at church, but those expectations from the church for me are just too great, so I won't put my hand up to help. So I think that's another thing that will impact the church, because you're getting less people wanting to get involved because of those expectations down the track.
Leah, when it comes to our younger pastors, what does this mean for them?
Well, what I've noticed is a lot of these pastors step into sort of parachurch organisations, so they stay in ministry, but you get more of them going on long-term mission trips, stepping into chaplaincy roles with different organisations. So I think for us, we've got so many options out there, and I believe so do the pastors. So as soon as they start to get burnt out, then they're going to move on to something else. And there's so many opportunities out there for them that that's what they're doing.
When it comes to marketing and selling to different generations, Mark McCrindle's often speaking to businesses, but perhaps what he has to say has something to say to us in churches as well. For example, when it comes to Generation Y and Z, he suggests don't just design something for them and market it at them, but design it with them and communicate it through them.
Absolutely, absolutely. That sense of all of their teaching and training has meant that they've been doing things together. So that carries on into the marketing space or trying to get someone to something. There's always a better offer, particularly with Gen Y and Gen Z or Gen X. And so if you're including them in the process, then there's buy-in and they want to actually be at what they've created and what they've wanted to plan to do.
Whether we're developing new programs or new churches.
Absolutely.
Yep. McCrindle says that past marketers use big brand names for baby builders, or factual comparisons for boomers, or even anti-ads for Gen X. But Gen Y and Z are things like the experience of social connections.
Yeah.
We can note the peer influence of Facebook and YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. And even things up and coming like Snapchat or Periscope. Actually, you're in somebody's world and you can see what's happening in that space. So that I think is really critical, experiencing the life of what's going on in someone else's space. So experience, I think, is really critical in that.
They're after things that are fun and entertaining, he suggests, cool and socially desirable, and life enhancing, because Generation Y and Z are actually longing for meaning and for making a lasting
difference. Wanting to actually make a difference in this world. Absolutely.
Do you think the church, Kylie, has something to say?
Absolutely. You know, why we're on mission is the most important aspect, and there's no bigger mission than what we've got. So I think if we can have the opportunity to tap into that space with our generations, our younger generations, the opportunities are endless. It's how we do that and actually engage with them is really critical.
Mark McCrindle is also helpful to identify a number of emerging trends across the generations. Firstly, he points out that we are in a big Australia with 23.8 million people in our population in 2015, and that's growing, and growing more than many countries.
Another emerging trend is tween town. We used to have kind of children's and youth, and now we have this in-between stage, which is kind of the tweens, your 8 to 12-year-old. It's a new demographic that's emerging.
Younger generations are sometimes studentpreneurs, that is, they get business experience while they're at university, often in a way that's very globally responsive to global trends or responding to global social justice issues.
Yeah. Smarter shopping is another trend that's coming, that's online and non-mainstream. So actually finding those unique online little places to be able to shop and to be able to get either a better deal, a cheaper price, or something that's more exclusive.
Despite the growing trends towards online shopping and online living, younger generations are emerging with a greater interest in real-world relational connections.
And definitely I think that flows into localisation, which is another emerging trend, which is about shopping locally, things like farmers markets, making sure you're buying direct from the grower. So there's certainly an emerging trend that's happening at the moment.
And if you want to understand different generations, one space, of course, to go to is our schools. And many of our schools are actually made up of Generation X, Y and Z, because we've got Generation X parents who and the schools are looking for more and more Generation Y teachers who are closer to the students' ages and to replace other retiring teachers, with Generation Z students who are wanting and expecting that kind of collaborative, project-based, interactive and flexible approach to learning. But I wonder, if these are 7 of the emerging trends that Mark McCrindle helpfully points out, what are the implications for our churches?
Yeah, I think one is, how do you keep up with all of these new trends? I feel like it's such a changing and rapidly changing world. It's being able to pick up on maybe just a couple of trends that really stand out and be able to work with that. Is it the tween space? Is it the localisation? maybe that's a great opportunity to be able to do things more locally because you're actually speaking into a culture that wants to do life locally.
Mark McCrindle concludes by saying, only occasionally in history does massive technological change combine with rapid demographic trends and huge social shifts so that within the span of a decade, society altogether alters.
Yeah.
And today we're living in one such transformation. What does the Baptist Union and our Baptist tribe of churches need to do, Kylie, in response to this?
Yeah, I think one of our first responses is to seek to understand each other in order to be able to gain a better respect and honour of each other, and then seek to actually reach this generation in a way that they can hear it. We've got some significant things that are on our front, but with that there's significant opportunity. So if we want to reach the next generation, we need to speak their language and to be able to reach them in a way that sees the kingdom come. Meanwhile, what do you think are some critical issues for our LOTE churches in regards to the information that we've talked about today?
Well, if I summarize the three things, one is that the young people who are educated here and they're so busy with their work, not only work, they just really wanting to study more and have family. So the challenge thing is about whether they can really volunteer work and how much they can contribute in the church. The second thing is when we have some mentoring system or some support people for those young leaders to understand about the context. It's about they work with the first generation migrant and also they're kids by the parents. So understanding about the context, they are going to work in this particular migrant community. The third one is also for our older generation, we have to learn about that our cultures changed and our young people's young people's generation is so different to our older generation. So the expectations that is can be burden, but also how we can be aware of that together through these studies. Hi, Leah. Today what we talk about from all of this, what is the impact for our generation Y and what you see and what you can share with us?
Yeah, look, I see a really exciting time for our churches. There's some really great opportunities to get on the Gen Y's level and communicate with them the way we understand, like through social media. I had a pastor through the BUV I was speaking to, and I asked, you need to add this person on Facebook and you can just send a message to this other pastor through Facebook. And he said, oh no, I don't have Facebook and I'm not going to get on Facebook. This was an older generation pastor. And I just thought, that's so stupid, because you've lost the whole connection point there. You're never going to get through to this person unless you just send a message on Facebook. And this older boomer, I would say, just didn't want a bar of it. So I think the constant research coming out is going to help those older generations with the younger generations like us. Then it's really good for us to know the way the older generations work as well. And so I really see an exciting time for the church in this space, because there's a lot of young people that we can bring into these emerging leaders roles, and there's going to be big opportunity there in the next 15 years, like we saw, for the younger generation to step up.
Great to hear, especially when you say this is great opportunity. And I also can see through Darren and Kylie and Leah, you're talking together, and how we are different generations, and also we have, through this learning, how this is great, and yes, great opportunity. Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for watching our discussion, guys, and if you want any more information or want to have some feedback on what we've all talked about today, please contact us. Best would be Kylie or Darren, get in touch with us. You can call us at the union to continue the conversation. It's a really exciting time, and thanks for watching.